back to the business of space. I'm Ali Velshi. SpaceX's inaugural flight test of the Falcon 9 rocket in 2010 showed the world that newcomers are the future of the commercial space industry. Since then, everyone from tech billionaires to venture capitalists have been pumping millions of dollars into space startups. No surprise, many of these startups are located in the heart of Silicon Valley. The stakes are high and there are no guarantees of big payoffs, but as Melissa Chan reports, that isn't stopping these startups from thinking big.
It's a prospector's map to hidden treasure. Only the map is of space, and the treasure lies in asteroids. Private space company Planetary Resources believes that incredible amounts of plutonium and rare earth metals could be mined from these asteroids, metals used in electronics that to date are mined mostly in China.
The ability to access resources in that environment, as opposed to digging up the Earth and hauling things up out of the gravity well of Earth, that is a change in the economic equation of the cost of doing business in space.
The prospector for their galactic enterprise, an orbiting space telescope called the Arcid. In the coming decades, the plan is to send robotic probes to collect and bring samples back to Earth, but it may be decades before real payback happens for investors in asteroid mining. And there are setbacks, like this one. One of Planetary Resources' Arcid telescopes headed for testing in space was destroyed in the Antares rocket explosion.
Stage 1 separation.
Many other commercial space companies lost equipment being sent to the space station for testing.
Putting things into orbit is not a trivial task.
It was the same for Will Marshall's space company, Planet Labs. It lost 26 nanosatellites in the explosion.
Your company took a hit?
Yes, but not on the scale that you might imagine. I mean, really, we took this in our stride. It's not a huge deal for us financially.
Planet Labs had already launched 71 of their nanosatellites into space in the last 18 months, with an estimated resolution of 10 to 16 feet.
This is one of Planet Labs' nanosatellites. It's just 12 inches long and 4 inches wide. Not exactly what you think of when you think of satellites. They call these doves and send them up in flocks, 20 or 30 at a time, into orbit. And the aim is to take pictures of the entire planet, not just one site.
It covers about 100 square kilometers per picture.
Nanosatellites are smaller and much less expensive to manufacture than its predecessors.
CubeSats today have more capability than the biggest satellites that we flew 50 or 40 years ago.
And they're disposable. After a year or two, they burn into the atmosphere, and more are launched. It's changing the way we see the Earth.
These are sugarcane fields in south and east of the Amazon. This was August 8th. This was August 9th, and you can see where both this field is being burned and sort of points up why it's important to see the Earth every day.
Companies, or even countries, will be able to buy the information beamed back by the satellites in real time about a part of the globe of interest.
They give us the option of really accessing space for sometimes less than $100,000 or even cheaper. And with that kind of low-cost technology, we have the ability to image the Earth at greater frequencies than we've ever done before.
Planet Labs raised $65 million in 2013 to launch its satellites.
Are you looking at a multi-billion-dollar industry when it comes to nanosatellites?
No, I think we estimated it at several gazillion. I'm just being silly. Yeah, so no, it is a very large sector. The remote sensing sector is pretty large and expanding.
Nanosatellites and CubeSats are one of the fastest growing sectors of the space industry, and potentially one of the most lucrative. The number of these Earth observation satellites is expected to increase by almost 90% over the next decade, resulting in more than $35 billion in manufacturing revenues.
The ability to actually get satellites into orbit fast is really important.
And Jason Dunn wants to help those satellites get into orbit quicker. He's the Chief Technology Officer for Made in Space, a startup that has built a zero-gravity 3D printer.
We have liftoff of the Falcon 9.
The company launched its first 3D printer to the International Space Station for testing in September. But Dunn thinks his 3D printer could be a game changer for nanosatellites by 3D printing the satellite.
We're actually finding ways that we can launch some of the parts, the electronics, for instance, that you can't 3D print. and then printing the rest of the satellite, assembling it on the space station, and launching it. And that's something that we're able to do right now.
The satellites could then be made and released in space, dramatically reducing the cost of launch.
What this actually ends up doing for the satellite industry is it makes it easier to constantly get new satellites on orbit.
Dunn believes Made in Space's 3D printer will be crucial in the short term by helping astronauts living on the space station to 3D print spare parts. But in the long term, Dunn sees a much bigger, more ambitious picture.
It really points to a vision where we can remove dependency on Earth, where we can go to the moon and use the resources there and put that into a 3D printer and turn it into a house on the moon. It points to a direction of where human space exploration is headed.
Planet Labs has launched more commercial satellites this year than anyone else. Some were very short-lived and deorbited quickly, but it's just the beginning. The company plans to launch another 100 nanosatellites in the next year. Ali?
Thanks, Melissa. Melissa Chan for us on that story. I want to introduce my next guest. You can equate the space startup industry today with the internet startup industry of the 90s. That's according to Chad Anderson. He's the managing director of the Space Angels Network, which represents a group of investors that seed fledgling space startups. And you were watching this with me, Chad. I mean, I am so fascinated that there are people who think about these things. Yeah. How does a guy like you, responsible for helping companies like XCore and Planetary Resources, which we showed in the story, how do you know what's fantastical and ridiculous versus what really has potential?
I think people are starting to remember that the economy is not a closed system. So it's creation and R&D and science and innovation that fuels, it creates the new ventures and the new markets that stimulate the growth of the entire system. So as an investor, what you really want to look for is things that are pushing boundaries, that might seem fantastical to some, that are, you know, developing technology that's an order of magnitude better than anything else that exists, or is creating an entirely new market. I mean, that's how you make outsized returns, and that's what Silicon Valley was founded on, that mentality in the beginning. It's only recently that investors have started to reduce early stage investing to a formula, a diversification formula. Yeah.
Right, and so this is, I guess this gets to my next question. I mean, there's no real return on this, right? Other than having sold your investment to someone else, nothing that we have developed to go into space in this current commercial space boom has returned a profit.
In terms of returns to the investor, we're just starting to see some exits. I mean, this is still a very early...
And I should be clear, there are companies that support the industry, that build parts, that manufacture things. Right. That's where the money is at the moment. Nobody's going out to space and doing something and somehow selling that at a profit.
Some ones that you wouldn't really think of, Planetary Resources is making money. XCore is making money. Astrobotic is another moon, Google Lunar X Prize competitor who's looking to mine the moon, and they're making money today. So,
but where are they making the money? They're not that they set out to make money on. In other words, nobody's going to the moon bringing resources back, and
they haven't gone yet, but they're taking customer orders.
Is the failure rate in space going to be higher than that in Silicon Valley, or is it about the same?
This is a very interesting question because I mean, we're still early days. So to put it into context, though, Leroy was talking about this, but 15 years ago, 95, 98, there was a false start in the industry. Charlatans, he called them, but there was the success rate back then was minimal. The failure rate was almost all. Nowadays, the difference is, he also mentioned, is that entrepreneurs are coming, I mean, they're a lot more savvy. They're coming to the table with business plans that make sense. They're not saying, give me $1 billion and I'll build you a rocket ship, which is what they were saying before. They know how to do a lot more with less. And what's happening today, to give you an idea, we've had 100 companies have applied to our network this year. Probably 20 of those have made it through our screening process and been presented to investors as credible businesses.
Pretty good percentage.
Yeah, it's higher than we've been in the past, actually. So it speaks to the quality increases that we're seeing. And then that's resulted in 5 investments so far this year. And we're in due diligence talks with a couple more as well. So we could have another deal or two before the year is over.
What an interesting discussion. Thank you so much for being with us.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Chad Anderson is the managing director of the Space Angels Network. Well, when it comes to space startups and the commercial industry, the United States is well ahead the rest of the world. But coming up, we'll tell you the one thing China is doing way better than America when the business of space continues.
Small